He wore the same faded uniform every morning, polished his boots, raised the flag, picked up trash no one asked him to. To the town, he was just the strange old man stuck in the past, a relic no one really cared to know. Teenagers mocked him, adults avoided his eyes. But when he stepped into a courtroom one day, wearing that same worn-out jacket, the entire room stood in silence, not because of who they thought he was, but because of a truth none of them saw coming. This is the story of a promise kept in silence. And the moment the world finally listened, at the far end of Pine Street, tucked between two abandoned lots and an old laundromat that hadn't seen customers in years, lived a man most people barely noticed. James Rowe, 76 years old, a Vietnam War veteran, woke every morning before the sun broke through the fog. In a small, dimly lit apartment that smelled faintly of shoe polish and old paper, he began his day with the same ritual he had kept for decades. He sat by the window, hands gnarled with age and arthritis, and carefully polished his worn military boots until they gleamed like obsidian. His movements were slow, methodical, almost ceremonial, each stroke of the cloth a silent prayer to those who never came home. Once done, he clipped on a faded dog tag under his undershirt, then stepped outside, unfolding the American flag with precise hands and raising it on the pole outside his door. The flag never drooped, not even in the worst weather. Every day, rain or snow, holiday or not, he walked 2 miles to Memorial Park. He wasn't going for leisure. James carried with him a small trash bag and a reacher stick, quietly collecting garbage left behind by visitors too distracted to care. He spoke to no one, made no complaints, and never failed in this quiet duty, not even when the pain in his knees made each step feel like shrapnel lodged in the bone. Locals whispered. Some laughed. "There goes the old soldier. Still fighting ghosts," teenagers would joke from across the street. Children spun wild tales about him, that he talked to invisible enemies or thought he was still at war. A few mimicked explosion sounds when he passed, ducking behind cars like it was a game. He never looked their way. His back, though bent with time, remained straight with purpose. To them, he was a relic. To himself, he was simply finishing a mission most had long forgotten. At the far end of Pine Street, tucked between two abandoned lots and an old laundromat that hadn't seen customers in years, lived a man most people barely noticed. James Rowe, 76 years old, a Vietnam War veteran, woke every morning before the sun broke through the fog. In a small, dimly lit apartment that smelled faintly of shoe polish and old paper, he began his day with the same ritual he had kept for decades. He sat by the window, hands gnarled with age and arthritis, and carefully polished his worn military boots until they gleamed like obsidian. His movements were slow, methodical, almost ceremonial, each stroke of the cloth a silent prayer to those who never came home. Once done, he clipped on a faded dog tag under his undershirt and stepped outside, unfolding the American flag with precise hands and raising it on the pole outside his door. The flag never drooped, not even in the worst weather. Every day, rain or snow, holiday or not, he walked 2 miles to Memorial Park. He wasn't going for leisure. James carried with him a small trash bag and a reacher stick, quietly collecting garbage left behind by visitors, too distracted to care. He spoke to no one, made no complaints, and never failed in this quiet duty, not even when the pain in his knees made each step feel like shrapnel lodged in the bone. Locals whispered, some laughed, "There goes the old soldier. Still fighting ghosts," teenagers would joke from across the street. Children spun wild tales about him, that he talked to invisible enemies or thought he was still at war. Few mimicked explosion sounds when he passed, ducking behind cars like it was a game. He never looked their way. His back, though bent with time, remained straight with purpose. To them, he was a relic. To himself, he was simply finishing a mission most had long forgotten. It was a Tuesday morning when the letter arrived, tucked beneath his door like any other piece of forgotten mail. The envelope was plain, marked with the county seal. James picked it up with the same care he used to handle field orders decades ago. His eyes, clouded with age but still sharp in their own way, scanned the contents. A summons. Witness for a criminal case. Courtroom 3, Jefferson County Courthouse. He read the letter again. Then again. The name on the case meant nothing to him. Malik Jefferson. Young, black, charged with assaulting a police officer. The kind of case that rarely ends well for people like Malik. But James said nothing out loud. He just set the paper on his desk and stared out the window for a long while, his reflection caught faintly in the glass. Old eyes, staring at a man shaped by duty. That night, he didn't sleep much. He sat at his table, the court letter beside a dusty photo album. He flipped through images of another life. Men in fatigues, smiles etched in mud, a young soldier who looked nothing like the one in the mirror now. And when dawn came, James rose slowly, opened his closet, and removed his dress uniform from its protective plastic. The jacket still held the smell of war and memory. He knew exactly why he had been called. The Jefferson County Courthouse loomed like a gray monument to bureaucracy, unfeeling, efficient, and indifferent. James arrived just before 9 a.m., dressed in his full, formal uniform. The dark green jacket hung looser now, medals neatly pinned across his chest, though his shoulders bore the quiet weight of time. His beret, faded and worn, was positioned at the precise angle military regulation demanded. As he entered the courthouse lobby, conversations paused for half a breath, then resumed with snickers and whispered remarks. Is he lost? Veterans Day's months away. One security guard nudged another, smirking. Poor guy, probably thinks he's here for a parade. A young attorney in a sharp suit passed him with a sneer. Halloween came early, ha-ha. James heard it all. He didn't respond. He didn't flinch. His weathered hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the numbness that never truly left his fingers after the war. But his back straightened just a bit more, his chin lifted, not in pride, but in quiet defiance. Dignity, he believed, was not a posture, it was a vow. The clerk pointed him down the hallway to Courtroom 3 without making eye contact. As James walked, a few people turned to stare. One woman instinctively pulled her child closer as though decades of service might be contagious. Another took a photo with her phone, smiling as if she'd spotted a museum piece. But James didn't see them. He saw only the hallway ahead, long and polished, echoing slightly under the sharp rhythm of his boots. Each step was deliberate. Each breath is measured. He was not here to explain himself. He was not here to earn applause. He was here because a promise made half a century ago had finally come due. And though the room ahead held strangers, judgment, and a cloud of doubt, he would enter the way soldiers always do, ready to stand for someone who could no longer stand alone. Courtroom 3 was already half full when James entered. The air buzzed with the low murmur of idle chatter, the shuffle of papers, the click of pens. No one turned at first. No one noticed the figure stepping through the heavy wooden doors until the clerk called his name aloud. The court calls Mr. James Rowe, former commander, Bravo Company, 25th Infantry Division. The words landed like a drop of ink in still water. Conversation stalled. Heads turned. Even the judge, who had looked bored moments earlier, straightened in his chair, blinking as though he'd heard a name pulled from the pages of a history book. But it wasn't just a surprise that swept the room. Every uniformed officer along the walls and exits, bailiffs, deputies, and guards, stood in unison. Their movements were automatic, trained, and respectful. Backs straightened, eyes sharpened, chins lifted. One of them, a broad-shouldered sergeant with deep-set eyes and a nameplate that read Martinez, visibly stiffened, then snapped to attention. James met his eyes. A flicker of recognition passed between them. Something older than memory, deeper than words. A ripple of confusion moved through the courtroom. Spectators looked around, trying to understand. Who is this guy? Someone whispered. Why are they standing? But no one answered. No one needed to. Something in the silence spoke louder than any explanation. James stepped forward slowly, each step a testament to the pain endured and discipline held. His boots clicked against the tile, the only sound in the courtroom now. He passed the gallery with eyes fixed ahead, never looking to see who might still be smirking, who had just lowered their phone in shame. For a moment, even time seemed to pause. This wasn't pageantry. This wasn't nostalgia. This was respect, unspoken, instinctive, and earned the hard way. The bailiff guided James to the witness stand. As he raised his right hand for the oath, a hush descended once more. Even the most cynical faces in the courtroom, those who had mocked his uniform, his presence, his age, now looked on with a hesitant kind of attention, the kind reserved for stories that might carry unexpected weight. Once sworn in, James adjusted the microphone with shaking hands. He cleared his throat, not to command the room, but to make sure his voice would carry. and when he spoke, it came low and graveled but unwavering. I witnessed the incident in question, he began, his eyes never leaving the judge's, on Tuesday, April 15th at approximately 2:43 in the afternoon. I was across the street, seated on the bench outside the coffee shop. He paused, letting the room settle around his words. Malik Jefferson did not assault Officer Brennan, James continued. He intervened verbally, only verbally, when the officer was using excessive force against a homeless veteran. The man was having a seizure. He was not resisting. His medical alert bracelet was visible. The prosecution shifted in their seat, visibly uncomfortable. The lead attorney, sharp-suited, previously confident, stood quickly, her voice clipped. Your Honor, this witness was not disclosed to us until yesterday. Given his advanced age, we question his mental clarity and ability to accurately recount events. James didn't blink. He didn't need to defend himself. His calm demeanor did that for him. The judge leaned forward, removing his glasses with a slow, deliberate motion. Mr. Rowe, he said, his tone no longer dismissive, why should the court consider your testimony reliable? In response, James reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered, leather-bound notebook. It looked ancient but well-kept, like something sacred. I've been documenting injustices I witnessed for 53 years, he said simply. Time, date, place, every one. I was there. I took notes. I recorded details, not opinions. He opened the book to a specific page and held it up, pointing with a trembling finger. I wrote this the moment it happened. The officer struck the veteran in the side of the head, causing him to collapse further. That's when Malik stepped forward. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't curse. He said, please stop. He's not resisting. That's all. You could have heard a pin drop. Malik, seated at the defense table, had been staring at the ground, but now his eyes lifted slowly to meet James's. They didn't know each other, not in the way most would understand, and yet something passed between them at that moment, something ancient and binding, unspoken but undeniable. The defense attorney, previously unsure, now found his footing. We would like to enter a new piece of evidence, he said. Surveillance footage from a nearby coffee shop. The prosecution had access to it, but failed to present the full recording. On the courtroom screen, the unedited footage played. It showed the entire scene just as James had described it. A homeless man in tattered military gear, stumbling and convulsing. Officer Brennan shoved him repeatedly, Malik stepping in, not with violence but with urgency. His exact words rang clear from the video. Sir, please stop. He's not resisting. He's having a seizure. Look at his bracelet. Then came the shove. Brennan's hand on Malik's chest pushed him backward. The moment that had been twisted, misrepresented, and edited into something it was never meant to be. The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was shame. The prosecutor's jaw clenched. Her pen slipped from her hand and clattered against the floor. James sat still, unmoving. He had seen this before, this slow unraveling of lies beneath the weight of truth, only this time it wasn't on a battlefield, it was in a courtroom where justice was supposed to be the weapon, not the casualty. The judge leaned back slowly in his chair, the silence in the courtroom stretching, thick as fog before dawn. He stared at James for a long moment as though weighing not just the man's words, but the decades behind them. And why, Mr. Rowe, he asked softly, would you come forward for this young man you apparently don't know? James didn't answer immediately. He reached into his jacket pocket again, this time with a care that felt different, more sacred. From the folds of the fabric, he pulled out a photograph, protected in worn plastic, the edges yellowed with time but preserved like treasure. He held it up. The image showed a young boy, no more than 9, dressed in an oversized suit, solemnly holding a neatly folded American flag in both hands. The boy's eyes mirrored grief far beyond his years. And behind him, a closed casket draped in the stars and stripes. James looked directly at Malik, his voice steady but heavy with memory. Because I knew his father. The words struck like a chord no one expected. Michael Jefferson, James continued, Staff Sergeant, Bravo Company. He was the last man from my unit to die in Vietnam. Sharp gasps swept the courtroom. Even the court reporter paused, her fingers on the keys. The prosecution sat frozen. James kept going, not with dramatic flair, but with the quiet, terrible precision of a man who had carried something for far too long. April 30th, 1975, he said, final day of the war. We were evacuating civilians from Saigon. It was chaos, screaming, fire, choppers overhead. I was helping a mother with 2 children when Michael pushed me hard into a drainage ditch. A moment later, a grenade landed right where I'd been standing. James' jaw clenched as he recounted it. His voice dropped to a near whisper. He took the blast full on. He knew what he was doing. He didn't hesitate. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Malik moved. His back straightened. His lips parted slightly, stunned into silence. Nate was 22, James said, and he never met his son. But he carried your picture, Malik. Every step through the jungle, he kept it folded in a waterproof pouch in his chest pocket. He showed it to everyone in the unit, said it kept him sane. James paused, the weight of time thick in his throat. Before he died, he said he grabbed my hand, couldn't speak much, but he said one thing clear as day, keep an eye on my boy. He looked at Malik again. I made him that promise. The room was still. Even the judge, long hardened by procedure and repetition, seemed visibly shaken. For 49 years, James went on, I kept my word. Quietly, from a distance. I was there at your middle school spelling bee. I sat in the back row of your high school graduation. I anonymously paid your college application fees when your mom couldn't afford them. I never interfered, never approached you. Because that's not what a promise is for. A promise isn't about being seen, it's about being honored. A sound escaped Malik, then a single broken breath. His eyes were glassy, stunned. The weight of it all settled on him like history crashing through the glass. You knew him, he managed, his voice cracking. James nodded once, slow and sure. He was the bravest man I ever served beside, and now I see that same courage in you. The defense attorney, visibly moved, placed a gentle hand on Malik's shoulder. The judge, no longer hiding the emotion in his eyes, leaned forward. You've watched over him his whole life? Yes, Your Honor, James replied. He never knew it, but I was there, always. And why now, the judge asked. Why step forward today? James let out a breath like releasing the weight of half a century. Because he stood up for someone who couldn't protect himself, he said. He didn't do it for glory or thanks. He did it because it was right, just like his father. The judge sat still for a long moment, his fingers laced beneath his chin. Then, without a word, he signaled to the defense. The attorney nodded and approached the bench, holding a USB drive. Your Honor, this is the unedited footage from Officer Brennan's body camera. The prosecution submitted a shortened version. What you're about to see is the entire interaction, start to finish. A few jurors exchanged glances, bracing for what might come next. The screen lit up and the room turned their attention to the playback. It began, just as James had described, a homeless veteran stumbling near a sidewalk, his body jerking with the early signs of a seizure. He wore a battered army jacket and dog tags barely visible under his collar. Officer Brennan, tall and impatient, barked commands. The man didn't respond. Then came the strike. Without warning, Brennan shoved the man against a railing. The veteran collapsed onto the pavement, convulsing. Onlookers hesitated, unsure what they were seeing. Then came Malik. He stepped forward, not aggressively, but urgently, his voice clear. Sir, please stop. He's not resisting. He's having a seizure. Look, his bracelet, he needs medical help. The courtroom heard every word. Then, as if punishing him for his concern, Officer Brennan forcefully shoved Malik backward. That was the assault on record. The room froze. Even the jury, trained to remain neutral, began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The prosecutor stared down at her desk, unmoving. The chief of police, seated in the rear, closed his eyes as if he, too, had seen this one time too many. Judge Harrison finally cleared his throat, his voice firmer than before. In light of the full footage and the testimony provided by Mr. Rowe, all charges against Mr. Jefferson are hereby dismissed immediately. The gavel struck once, sharp, final. Malik sat in disbelief, his eyes wide, his chest rising and falling in silent waves. Then slowly, almost unsure, he turned toward James. The old soldier stood from the witness box, steady on his feet, though his face had softened. As he moved toward the back of the courtroom, something remarkable happened. No one said, not the jury, not the court reporter, not the prosecutor, not even the judge. They all rose to their feet, not out of obligation, but in quiet reverence. It was not the uniform that commanded their respect. It was the truth wrapped in a promise finally fulfilled. 3 days after the trial, on a quiet Sunday morning, James was polishing his boots like always when a knock came at the door. Not loud, not impatient, just tentative. He rose slowly, his joints protesting as always, and opened it. Standing there in jeans and a hoodie was Malik Jefferson, nervous, uncertain, and holding a box of donuts and a large coffee. "I didn't know what else to bring," he said almost apologetically. "May I come in?" James didn't speak at first. He simply stepped aside. The apartment was modest, almost bare, clean but lived in. The walls held memories more than decoration. Photographs of young men in uniform, some smiling, others stone-faced, all frozen in time. At the center, above a small shelf, stood a framed photo, James and a young Staff Sergeant Michael Jefferson, side by side in jungle fatigues, arms slung over each other's shoulders, both alive, both unknowing what the next day would bring. Malik paused in front of the photo, staring. He stepped closer, tracing the glass with a gentle fingertip. "Looks just like me," he whispered. James nodded. "He was proud of you before you were even born." They sat, sharing coffee in silence. Malik didn't ask many questions that day. He didn't need to. Sometimes presence says more than conversation ever could. But he returned the following Sunday and the next. Soon it became a ritual. Sunday afternoons belonged to them. Two men, bound not by blood, but by honor and memory. They talked about Malik's childhood, about his dreams of becoming a civil rights lawyer, and about the moments he almost gave up. James listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, Malik hung on every word, not out of obligation, but reverent. The community noticed. Teenagers who once jeered at the old man now lowered their voices when he passed. They saw Malik walking beside him, carrying his groceries, helping him step off the curbs. The sight made people pause. The police chief visited James and Malik in person, offering a quiet, sincere apology. Officer Brennan was reassigned to community service at the local Veterans Center, an act of restitution, however symbolic. And for the first time in a long while, James allowed himself to exhale without weight behind it. He never called Malik son. He didn't need to. Malik called him Father James. And that was enough to make the old soldier's eyes shine in a way even medals never had. For nearly 6 months, every Sunday without fail, Malik came by James's apartment just after noon. He always brought coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, and donuts, though James rarely ate more than half of one. They'd sit in that quiet living room, surrounded by faces frozen in time, talking about nothing and everything. James never spoke of the war unless asked, but sometimes between sips of lukewarm coffee, he'd offer a memory, small, specific, and razor sharp, a voice over the radio, a friend's last laugh. The sound of rain in the jungle never stopped. Higher Man never interrupted. He just listened, like a student taking notes from a master whose wisdom wasn't found in textbooks. And then one morning, the flag outside James's apartment didn't rise. At 6:00 a.m., neighbors noticed. At 6:30, someone knocked, no answer. By 7:15, 2 veterans from the local post used the spare key James had entrusted to them, just in case. They found him in his chair by the window, boots polished, dog tags resting neatly on the table beside him. His old unit photo was clutched in one hand. His expression was peaceful, almost expectant, like a man who knew reveille had sounded one final time. Pinned to the door was a note in his careful handwriting. "I never needed anyone to know who I was. I only hoped people would live in a way that made them unashamed to stand before a silent man." Next to the note was a small wooden box. Inside, his Purple Heart, worn and sacred, a folded copy of his handwritten will, and on top, addressed to one name in particular, to Malik Jefferson, who stood up, just as your father once did. The funeral was held 3 days later. Hundreds attended, veterans, civilians, strangers who had read the tiny obituary tucked away in the corner of the local paper. It simply read, "The man who made an entire courtroom rise." Malik stood in front of the flag-draped casket wearing James's Purple Heart over his suit. He didn't speak much, just placed his hand on the casket and whispered something only the dead could hear. The honor guard stood at attention for an hour without breaking formation. And every Veterans Day after, a quiet tradition began. at Jefferson County Courthouse beneath the new bronze plaque that reads, "Judge not by appearances, but by the measure of honor within." A man in a well-cut suit and polished shoes kneels before a grave. His children stand nearby as he carefully cleans the headstone, then places the Purple Heart back on its velvet lining and tells them about two men, one he never got to meet and one who kept a promise for a lifetime. He tells them that not all heroes wear capes or even uniforms that fit anymore. Some just keep showing up quietly without expecting thanks. That real honor doesn't announce itself, it simply endures. And when he rises again, brushing off his knees, he always whispers the same words his father once believed, and James proved true. Some debts can't be repaid, only passed forward.